Forget the endless gear debate because buying another camera body or hunting down the perfect lens isn't going to fix your photography. Seriously, we spend so much time obsessing over rumors, comparing spec sheets, and watching just one more review video that we actually forget to make stuff. I mean, look at how we treat the Apple ecosystem. Mark Gurman drops his weekend newsletter predicting the next iPad Pro, and everybody loses their minds. Ming-Chi Kuo tweets about iPhone supply chains, and suddenly millions of people are delaying their purchases. We get trapped in this exact same cycle with our cameras. Photography has changed in a strange way over the last few years. It usually begins with totally good intentions. You want to make the smartest investment possible. So you start watching reviews, comparing specifications, reading forums, and analyzing every tiny difference between models. First, it genuinely feels productive. You convince yourself that one more comparison video will finally make the perfect choice obvious. But the deeper you go, the more complicated everything becomes. Days turn into weeks, and weeks quietly become months. Meanwhile, your camera just sits untouched while real moments continue to pass by unnoticed. This endless search gets even more intense when Leica enters the conversation. Comparing the Leica M11, the Leica Q3, and the SL3 isn't just about cameras anymore. Each model represents a totally different identity. The M11 speaks to photographers who value heritage, craftsmanship, and the timeless rangefinder experience. The SL3 feels like the clear choice for professionals who need raw performance, versatility, and modern hybrid power. And somewhere right between those two worlds sits the Q3. It is often totally misunderstood because of one single word: fixed. Wait, really? A fixed lens on a camera that costs this much? That word immediately creates doubt for many photographers. I know it did for me. In today's tech culture, flexibility is always associated with interchangeable lenses, zoom ranges, and endless options. We want that seamless integration and Pro-Max flexibility. A fixed lens sounds limiting on paper. It literally sounds like a massive compromise, especially when you factor in the Leica Tax, which honestly makes the Apple Tax look like a bargain. But after spending real time with the Leica Q3, many photographers realize the exact opposite is true. The camera doesn't reduce your creativity. It removes distraction. Leica's philosophy was never built around endless options. From the very beginning, these cameras were designed around simplicity. The greatest photographers who helped shape Leica's legacy didn't carry giant bags full of lenses or constantly upgrade their equipment. They learned one camera deeply and used it so naturally that the tool itself completely disappeared. Their focus wasn't on specifications. It was on timing, composition, emotion, and storytelling. Somewhere along the way, modern photography culture buried that philosophy beneath upgrade obsession. But the Leica Q3 quietly brings that original idea back into the modern world. At the center of this camera is a massive 60-megapixel full-frame sensor capable of producing extraordinary detail. On paper, that number sounds impressive, but the real value goes completely beyond simple resolution. Because the files contain so much detail, you gain the absolute freedom to crop aggressively while still maintaining excellent image quality. Now, editing these massive files is where your hardware really matters. I was reading a recent report from DG Times about TSMC 3nm yields finally stabilizing for Apple's next silicon, and let me tell you, having a powerful daily driver MacBook is mandatory because these raw files are gigantic. You do not want to be caught in thermal throttling when rendering out this much data. Suddenly, that fixed 28mm lens no longer feels restrictive at all. It becomes flexible in a completely different way. Instead of constantly swapping lenses, you actually begin composing differently. You shoot wider, you step closer, you move way more intentionally, and you refine your framing later if necessary. The camera encourages physical movement rather than technical adjustments. Over time, this literally changes the way you see the world. Photography becomes less about gear management and entirely about instinct. The built-in 28mm f/1.7 Summilux lens plays a huge role. In that transformation, the focal length sits in this really unique space between environmental storytelling and pure subject intimacy. It captures enough of the surrounding scene to create a specific atmosphere, while still allowing an emotional connection with your subject. Are you guys constantly stuck in the gear research loop? Or are you actually going out and shooting? Drop a comment below because I genuinely want to know how you break out of that cycle. Combined with the fast aperture and optical image stabilization, The camera performs beautifully in difficult lighting conditions. Whether you're shooting on dark city streets, inside dim cafes, or during late-night travel sessions, what surprises a lot of photographers is how quickly that 28mm perspective begins to feel totally natural. First, you definitely notice what you can't do. There's no zoom ring, no lens switching, no endless focal length choices. But after several weeks, that mental noise completely fades away. You stop thinking about equipment. Your eye adapts. You begin to recognize scenes before even lifting the camera to your face. You instinctively know exactly where to stand and how to frame the image. Technically, the Q3 is also incredibly modern. The Leica recently reported on some massive shifts in Samsung's sensor supply chains. But what Leica is doing internally with their autofocus system is wild. It combines phase detection and contrast detection with incredibly reliable subject tracking for eyes, faces, bodies, and even animals. It shoots up to 15 frames per second, giving you enough speed for fast-moving moments without completely overwhelming the shooting experience. The electronic viewfinder is incredibly sharp, immersive, and responsive, while the tilting touchscreen adds flexibility for creative angles and street photography. Video creators definitely aren't ignored here either. The camera supports 8K recording at 30 frames per second and 4K, recording at 60 frames per second in 10-bit color. Full HD slow motion reaches 120 frames per second. It makes the Q3 surprisingly capable for demanding hybrid creators. Ross Young has been talking a lot about upcoming tandem OLED displays for future Apple devices, and honestly, viewing this 10-bit 8K footage on a high-end OLED panel is absolutely mind-blowing. Yet, despite all these advanced features, the camera never once feels complicated. Everything exists inside one incredibly compact body with one lens permanently attached. There is zero pressure to build a massive system. There is no constant temptation to buy another focal length. You literally just pick it up and start shooting. That simplicity has a really powerful psychological effect. On the street, the camera feels almost invisible. You move faster, react naturally, and stop drawing unnecessary attention to yourself. Since you aren't constantly adjusting equipment, your focus stays entirely on the people, the light, the movement, and the emotion. Travel photography becomes incredibly immersive because you are no longer carrying a heavy bag of gear or worrying about what lens to pack. You remain present in your environment instead of thinking about equipment. Portrait photography also takes on a very unique character. Shooting with a 28mm lens forces you closer to the subject, creating portraits that feel incredibly intimate and connected to the surrounding environment. Instead of isolating people completely from their world with a huge zoom, the camera lets you tell richer stories by including context. Of course, this doesn't make the Leica M11 or the SL3 any less important. Both cameras are exceptional in their own way. But the Q3 occupies a totally different space entirely. It isn't trying to be everything for everyone. It is trying to remove everything unnecessary. I mean, Shrimp Apple Pro leaked some wild camera bump designs for the next smartphone generations, and Mako Takara showed off 3D printed dummy models proving how complicated mobile lenses are getting. In a world filled with those constant upgrades and endless comparisons, simplicity becomes incredibly valuable. The biggest transformation with this camera isn't technical, it's totally mental. Once you stop obsessing over your gear, you start noticing light differently. You react way faster. You trust your instincts instead of questioning every single decision. Photography becomes intuitive again. Would you actually give up your interchangeable lenses for a fixed 28mm system? Let me know down in the comments. The endless search for the perfect setup loses all its power, because you finally realize creativity never came from having more options. It came from understanding one single tool deeply enough that it completely disappears between you and the image. For a lot of creators, that realization changes everything. You discover you never truly needed a giant collection of lenses or constant upgrades to create meaningful work. What you needed was clarity, a camera that simplified the entire process and removed all the distractions. A tool that encouraged you to stop comparing spec sheets and actually start shooting again. That is ultimately what makes the Leica Q3 feel so radically different. One solid body, one incredible lens, and one consistent perspective that slowly reshapes exactly how you see the world.